Welcome along to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a closer look at the Sunday sermons from right here at King's Christian Center, AOG, in Old Town Swindon.
Giving you a shortcut, really, to the main points.
Exactly. And today we're diving into the message Pastor Malcolm McQueen brought us just this past Sunday, July 6th, 2025. It was called Gideon, the Mighty Man of Valour.
A fantastic message.
It really was. So our aim here is to unpack the core insights, maybe some of those surprising bits from what Pastor Malcolm shared. We want to give you a clear handle on this incredible Bible story and, what it means for us today.
Definitely. And to really get Gideon, you kind of need the background, the historical setting.
Right. Where does this fit in?
So we're in the book of Judges. This is roughly between 1229 and 1169 BC. And there's this pattern, this cycle you see again and again with Israel at this time.
I remember Pastor Malcolm touching on this.
Yeah. They turn from God, they fall into sin, and then almost inevitably they face oppression from enemies.
Right. Cause and effect.
Then, when things get bad enough, they cry out to God for help. And God, in his mercy, raises up a judge, a leader, a deliverer to save them.
And then the cycle often starts again, doesn't it?
It does. Rebellion, suffering, crying out, rescue, repeat. It's quite the theme in Judges.
So when we meet Gideon in Judges chapter 6, verses 11 and 12, they're definitely in that suffering phase.
Oh, absolutely. Deep in it.
He's actually hiding, threshing wheat, but doing it by a winepress.
Which is just, well, it tells you everything, doesn't it? Threshing wheat needs wind, space. You do it out in the open.
Yeah, on a threshing floor.
A wine press is for crushing grapes. It's usually enclosed, maybe even dug into the ground.
Yeah.
Doing it there, it's pure desperation, hiding the little bit of grain he has left from the Midianites.
Total fear. Utterly defeated, you could say.
Exactly. Living in scarcity, hiding away. His whole world, their whole world had been squeezed.
So the big question Pastor Malcolm kicked off with was, how does this guy, the one hiding by the winepress, scared and defeated, how does he end up being called a mighty man of valor, a great warrior?
It's such a brilliant question because the contrast is so stark, isn't it? The angel of the Lord appears, and the first thing he says is, "The Lord is with you, thou mighty man of valor."
Wow. Right there in the middle of his hiding.
Right there. And Pastor Malcolm emphasized this wasn't just, a nice greeting. It was a declaration. It shows us that God sees something totally different from what we see in ourselves or our circumstances.
He sees the potential, the purpose.
Exactly. Like calling Abraham father of many before he had kids, or Sarah queen before she was a mother of nations.
God calls things that are not as though they were, Romans 4.1 CM.
Right. That's the one Pastor Malcolm highlighted. God speaks to who we will become according to his plan, not just who we are in that moment of fear or weakness. He's calling out the divine destiny.
That really shifts how you see things, doesn't it? Your own limitations, maybe. So seeing that blueprint. But Pastor Malcolm said the journey from that wine press to becoming that mighty man starts with understanding why Israel's was in that mess in the first place.
Yes, the root cause.
And it came down to one word, disobedience.
Simple as that, really. They just hadn't listened to God's voice.
Yeah.
Judges 6, verses 8 to 10 tells us prophets had warned them, but they wouldn't obey.
And Pastor Malcolm unpacked 3 characteristics of living in that state of disobedience. What were they again?
Okay, the first one was living in defeat. And this wasn't just like a minor setback. The Midianites were systematically ruining them.
It says they greatly impoverished Israel.
They did. Invading every year at harvest time, destroying crops, stealing livestock, forcing the Israelites to flee their homes and live in dens, caves, mountain hideouts.
Just surviving.
Barely. It was economic ruin, yes, but also social, cultural, spiritual destruction. It emptied the land, emptied their hope.
And Pastor Malcolm drew a parallel here, didn't he? A rather poignant one.
He did. He spoke about that kind of self-harming destruction, seeing echoes of it in contemporary Great Britain, suggesting from his perspective it's part of why the nation might have lost some of its greatness or foundation.
Yeah. And just to be clear for everyone listening, we're sharing Pastor Malcolm's specific take here, his interpretation from the sermon. We're not making a political statement, just unpacking the message as he delivered it. It's definitely food for thought, though.
It certainly is. The second characteristic he mentioned was living in spiritual darkness.
Yes. Gideon's first response to the angel.
Exactly. Judges 6.13. He basically says, okay, if God is with us, then why is all this happening? Where are the miracles? Has God abandoned us?
He sounds genuinely confused, lost.
He does. But the sermon's insight was sharp. It wasn't God who had abandoned Israel. Israel had abandoned God. And that led directly to this spiritual ignorance, this darkness, where they couldn't even see their own part in their suffering.
They couldn't connect the dots between their choices and the consequences.
Pretty much. They were blind to it.
So how do we fight that kind of darkness, especially when maybe, the Bible feels a bit daunting?
Well, Pastor Malcolm really stressed the importance of the Word of God here. He said it's not some boring old book if you actually know the author.
Oh, that's a great line.
Isn't it? Like if you engage with God through His Word, seeking His heart, it stops being just text and becomes alive. It's like sitting down with Shakespeare to understand Hamlet rather than just reading the script cold. The author brings it to life.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Okay, what was the third characteristic?
The third one was living in doubt. And Gideon, well, Gideon is almost exhibit A for this, isn't he?
The fleeces.
The fleeces, yes. Pastor Malcolm talked about the 5 ifs in Gideon's story. If the Lord is with us, if I've found favor, if you'll save Israel by my hand, asking for sign after sign.
He really struggled to believe it, didn't he?
Deeply. Pastor Malcolm said doubt's twin brother is unbelief.
Yeah.
But, and this is crucial, the sermon also emphasized God's incredible grace.
He didn't give up on Gideon.
Not at all. He met Gideon right there in his doubt, patiently answering his tests. Pastor Malcolm pointed to Mark 11.23 about believing in your heart without doubting. God is incredibly patient with our struggles. He never gives up on us.
That's really encouraging.
Absolutely. And another key point Pastor Malcolm brought out about the whole era of the judges. It's summed up in that phrase you hear a couple of times.
There was no king in Israel.
Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Judges 17.6, 21.25, just doing whatever seemed right to them personally.
And Pastor Malcolm saw a clear link to today.
A very direct link.
Yeah.
That tendency towards, I'll decide what's right for me. That kind of radical self-direction, often forgetting any higher authority or common good.
And when people turn from God, that spiritual space doesn't stay empty, does it?
No, it gets filled. Israel turned to the gods of the Canaanites. And Pastor Malcolm made a really strong point that these same gods, or at least the principles they represent, are making a comeback in Western culture today.
Which ones did he focus on?
He mentioned 3 specifically. First, Baal, the top god for the Canaanites and Phoenicians. His name means Lord or Master.
What was he associated with?
Fertility, prosperity, basically materialism. Chasing wealth and earthly success is the main goal. The god of more stuff.
Okay. Who is next?
Ashtaroth, or Ashtoreth. The female goddess.
Yeah.
Linked to fertility too, but also sexual love, war, sometimes called the Queen of Heaven, associated with sexual promiscuity.
And Pastor Malcolm noted a connection between the rise of materialism
And sexual promiscuity, yes. He pointed to the 1960s as a time when he felt both of those things really surged culturally, moving more into the mainstream.
Interesting observation. And the third god?
The third one was Molech. And this one is deeply disturbing.
This was the god linked to child sacrifice.
Yes. Horrifically. Worshipped in the Valley of Hinnom, near Jerusalem. Children were literally passed through the fire as offerings.
Just awful to even think about.
Truly. And Pastor Malcolm made a very challenging modern parallel here.
Right. How did he connect that?
He suggested that while we don't have literal child sacrifice like that, the spiritual vacuum left by turning from God is, in his interpretation, being filled in other tragic ways today. He specifically mentioned abortion clinics in this context.
That's a very stark comparison he drew.
It is. A very strong statement from the pulpit, reflecting his view on the spiritual state and the consequences of turning away from God's guidance. Again, we're conveying his message as presented.
Understood. Okay, so that paints a pretty bleak picture: defeat, darkness, doubt, false gods. But the sermon didn't leave us there, did it?
Not at all. That was the problem, rooted in disobedience. But Pastor Malcolm then shifted powerfully to the solution, obedience.
The way out, the path to purpose and victory.
Exactly. If disobedience leads down, obedience leads up.
So how do we make that shift? What does living in obedience actually look like based on Gideon's turnaround?
Pastor Malcolm laid out several characteristics, using Gideon as the example. First, you have to be obedient to the call.
God's specific instruction.
Yes. God told Gideon directly, "Go in this thy might, have not I sent thee." That's Judges 6.12. And crucially, he didn't just send him, he promised to go with him. "Surely I will be with thee," verse 16.
That companionship is key, especially given Gideon's fear.
Absolutely. Pastor Malcolm used the analogy of a police officer. They have authority not because of who they are personally, but because of who sent them, who commissioned them. Gideon needed to grasp that God was sending him, and God would be with him. It wasn't about Gideon's own might at all initially.
Recognizing the sender changes everything. Okay, what's next?
Second, Trust in the Lord. He is your sufficiency. This follows on perfectly.
Our ability comes from God.
That's the verse Pastor Malcolm used, 2 Corinthians 3:5.
Yeah.
Our sufficiency, or our ability is of God. It's not about how talented or strong you are. It's about making yourself available to God.
Availability over ability.
That's a great way to put it. When we lean on Him, our limits don't limit Him. He quoted William Carey, the missionary. Expect great things from God and attempt great things for God. Trusting Him unlocks His power in us.
I love that. Attempt great things for God. So good. What was the third point?
Third, we need to surrender our will to God.
Letting go of our own plans.
Pretty much. Pastor Malcolm emphasized God had an amazing plan for Gideon. Victory, not defeat. Making him a victor, not a victim. But Gideon had to yield to that plan.
Like Romans 12 asks us to. Present ourselves as a living sacrifice.
Exactly what Pastor Malcolm referenced, verses 1-3. Offering ourselves completely allows us to discover and live in God's good, acceptable, and perfect will. It's about trusting His plan over our own limited view. A total handover.
That takes real faith. Okay, number 4.
Number 4, become a worshiper of God.
This came after the angel's visit.
Yes, straight after. Gideon built an altar right there, Judges 6.24, and called it Jehovah Shalom, the Lord our peace.
Peace right in the middle of the chaos.
Isn't that powerful? And the sermon clarified worship isn't just singing. It's presenting our whole selves in service to God. Dedication.
And Pastor Malcolm mentioned the enemy wants worship too.
He did. Pointing out that the devil desires worship and uses distractions, often materialism, those Baal and Ashtaroth type things, to pull our focus away from worshiping the true God, keeping us focused on created things, not the Creator.
A constant battle for focus. All right, number 5.
Fifth, become a warrior. And this is maybe the most famous part of Gideon's story.
The shrinking army.
The shrinking army. From 32,000 down to just 300. Pastor Malcolm used this to illustrate Zechariah 4.6. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord.
God wanted to make it absolutely clear who got the victory.
Undeniably clear. And the sermon highlighted the selection process, those 300 who stayed alert, lapping water like dogs ready, versus those who knelt down carelessly. Alertness was key.
And then God's math.
God's math. Where Pastor Malcolm reminded us, 1 man shall chase 1,000, 2 of you will chase 10,000. God's power just explodes human limitations when we operate in His Spirit.
Amazing. Was there a 6th point?
Yes. The final characteristic mentioned in Pastor Malcolm's outline was wisdom.
Ah, okay. How did Gideon show wisdom?
Well, we see it after the battle, particularly in Judges chapter 8. The men of Ephraim, a big, powerful tribe, they come complaining, quite angry actually, that they weren't called earlier to the main fight.
That tricky situation. Could have turned nasty.
It really could have. But Gideon, instead of getting defensive or proud, he handles it so wisely. He humbly downplays his own role and praises their contribution, asking, what was I able to do compared to you? He diffuses the whole thing.
That's real leadership wisdom.
It is. And then later, when the people try to make him king after the victory, he refuses. He says, I won't rule over you, my son won't rule over you, the Lord will rule over you.
Pointing them back to God.
Exactly. Showing humility and understanding God's rightful place. So it wasn't just about being a warrior. Obedience led to wisdom in leadership and life, too.
What?
It completes the picture.
Wow. What a journey. From hiding in fear to leading with wisdom and faith. So, wrapping up Pastor Malcolm's message on Gideon, it really boils down to this choice, doesn't it?
It really does. A timeless choice.
You can live in disobedience, and the result seems pretty clear. Defeat, spiritual darkness, doubt, getting tangled up with the wrong things.
That's the downward path.
Or you can choose obedience. Following God's call, trusting Him, surrendering your will, becoming a worshiper, a warrior, gaining wisdom. And that path leads somewhere entirely different.
It leads to purpose, to victory, and ultimately to that Jehovah Shalom, the peace of God.
So maybe the final thought for you listening, something to really chew on from this deep dive.
Yeah, how could you, right now, start to discover that mighty man or mighty woman of valor that God actually sees in you? Even if, like Gideon, your current situation feels more like the winepress than the battlefield.
What might change if you chose obedience today, believing God's view of you over your own fears or feelings?
It's a powerful question to take away.
Definitely. And if you want to dig deeper into this or hear Pastor Malcolm's message in full, please do check out the King's Christian Center YouTube channel.
You can find this sermon and all the previous ones there. Great resource.
Just search for us on YouTube or go to @KCC Old Town Swindon UK. That's KCC Old Town Swindon UK.
Well worth exploring.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope it's blessed you and maybe sparked something new in your walk with God.